privacy purposes.
Yes, for privacy purposes, just like the part with the lecture. So I think it's recording now. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Let me know if it's visible. All right. All right.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining our event. We're actually so excited to have all of you here. Um, and we want this to be a safe space for learning and for us to get to know each other, and ultimately like help you practice skills that are going to be super useful in life and possibly this season, because this is like interview season for a lot of folks who might be applying to things. Um, so next slide. Thank you so much for taking time, especially Jackson. I know you're on the East Coast, so I know it's late. Probably want to go to sleep. Just an overview of what today's session will look like. We'll start by talking a little bit about why we thought this workshop was important to bring to CFAM, and then we'll go into some suggestions on how you might frame your story, specifically answering the question, tell me about yourself. We'll go over some brief, like, nitty gritty on how you should show up to interviews. And then we'll have an activity. We would do breakout groups maybe if there are a few more people, but I think maybe we'll just do a large group because it's a more intimate gathering and we all shared each other's favorite smells at this point, so we're all best friends. Um, if that's all right with y'all. So, why is this important? Let's go to the next slide. Kind of just the question, tell me about yourself, is your first impression to a lot of people. And it's asked so frequently, and yet it's pretty much one of the hardest questions to ask. The goal of answering this question is really to kind of establish your brand. And I hate using marketing terminology, but ultimately, an interview is like selling yourself in some ways. We want to showcase your values and we want to highlight your skills. But in order to do that, we want to be able to do it in like a compelling storytelling sort of way. Also important opportunity to clarify your goals because that sets sort of a direction for your conversation with the person. When do we answer this question? A cajillion times. For those of us who are already, well past undergrad, we know that like med school interviews, master's interviews, getting your first job, and even within different like campuses, getting leadership roles, this question is often asked. More informally, sometimes people who are looking for mentors might have this spiel ready. It's just a great way to connect with people around you. And why do we practice? Why are we having this workshop today? As I mentioned, like answering the tell me about yourself question is hard. It is daunting because who you are, it's really hard to distill into 1 or 2 minutes. But it's something that we can practice, and the answer will probably change as we go along, so we want to practice being adaptable. Okay, so there are a lot of ways that someone can frame their story. We just have a couple of suggestions that might make it easier and a little bit less daunting. The first sort of strategy that we offer is creating a table. Some of you might have done some sort of version of this for like your CV or something like that. But really, before you can craft like a narrative of who you are, it can be helpful to sort of lay out all the puzzle pieces. So what this is, you see the left two columns are kind of like basic. It looks like your work activities section of your med school app or, your resume. It's just your experience, and then lists the actual activities that you would do. On the right-hand side, we have your skills and your values column. And these are things that are a lot more universal, that go beyond sort of the singular activity that you did. The reason that I think these right-sided columns are really important is because sometimes you're applying to, let's say, I don't know, like a research job, and you've been pipetting since you were like 15 years old. So you're like, oh, I've got the skills. Like, this is awesome. But, like, that's not everybody's story, but you still have to prove to people that you are fit for the job. And so this is where sort of the transferable skills and the universal values can be compelling to an interviewer that you are still a good fit for a position or still a good fit for a spot in med school, a spot in residency, because ultimately a lot of skills can be learned, right? But are you heading in the same direction? Are you mission aligned? And that's something that people are looking for. The example that I put here is like in the middle, a high school tutor. So during one of my gap years prior to med school, I was a
Oh,
one-on-one
wow.
high school tutor for um, a student who had some disabilities. Hi, Matt. Thanks for coming. Um, and I remember asking myself, like, oh my God, like tutoring English and algebra, like how is that related to medicine in any sort of way? But the skills that I took away from it included like organization, time management, learning how to communicate with a family. And in terms of how it informed my values, I realized I love like working one on one with people and creating these personalized plans for folks. And those skills and those values are all super applicable in medicine. So just like want to be encouraging that, maybe you have diverse interests. And I think that's great. It makes you special, it makes you well rounded. And it's still something that should be part of your story for why you are applying to something or how you are here today. Okay, this is a really quick sidebar, but I mentioned a CV. Um, this I think maybe could be helpful for Jackson. I don't remember what year you said you were in, but I'm sure you're starting to collect like a cajillion different clubs and activities that you're doing. Um, and it can be hard to keep track. Something that I've found helpful is when I join an organization, I literally write it down in an Excel sheet and I write down what my goals are in that organization and things that I've already accomplished. You're going to do so much shit in college, like you're not going to remember everything. So it can be helpful to like have a running log. Sorry, I swore. That was not appropriate. um, but it can be helpful to have a running log so that when it comes time to making that table that I just showed everybody in the previous slide, you have like a lot of the like work and activities part already filtered out, and then you can spend some time reflecting on the values and the skills. So you can, this is just a template. Hello, thank you so much for joining. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me? I didn't realize I had muted myself. All right, so now we'll transition into how to actually format what you're going to say when you're answering the question, tell me about yourself. So the slide that you see here is actually a modified slide from something that we lifted from the work of Professor Alison Tintianco-Cubales. She is a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. And she got this concept of telling your talambuhay or your life story in three parts or tatlong bagsak. And so this concept was actually lifted from the work of the late Dr. Don Bahulano Mabalon, who is was a Filipino-American historian. And so the concept of how to kind of break down your answer to tell me about yourself into these three parts is essentially telling it in chronological order, your past, your present, and your future. And so let's look at these tatlong bagsak individually, starting with your past. So you'd want to, in your answer, highlight your previous life experiences and especially the strengths and the lessons that you learned from these life experiences and how it's shaped you, who you are, and what you stand for. And so where relevant, you can incorporate your cultural identity, your ancestry, your community, especially if it's really important to what you stand for and what you can foresee yourself doing in the future, and as well as how it's relevant to the opportunity you're applying for. And so that moves to the present, which is what you're doing currently and how it's relevant to what you're applying for. So you could also talk about a little bit about how you got to where you're currently at, but mostly focus on the skills that you're honing with your current experiences and how these skills are translatable to you excelling in the opportunity that you're applying for. And so that moves to the future, which is your future plans, your career goals, and how this opportunity, whether it's med school, residency, fellowship, a research opportunity, et cetera, how this fits into your future plans and your career goals. And so Indeed.com also has an article about how to answer this question, tell me about yourself. And they offer a very similar format of past, present, and future. But another tip that they brought up in that article is changing the order, not necessarily going in the chronological order of past, present, future, but you can change it so that you highlight your future goals first. And so that gives the tone for what you're going to say in your past and present experiences and how those have contributed to what your future career goals are. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is just another way to kind of break up your story. This one is lifted from LinkedIn's article on how to answer the tell me about yourself question. And so what they suggest is to break down your story into 80% of it focusing on work experience and accomplishments, 10 to 15% on academics, and 5 to 10% of your personal life story. And so this is where it's really important to kind of research the program beforehand and know what they're looking for in an applicant. Because you might not necessarily have the most directly relevant past experiences to this opportunity you're applying for. And you want to be able to kind of tailor your story or your spiel to make it sound like you have the skills from these maybe irrelevant experiences and how these skills will help you be a good fit for this job or this admission to medical school or residency or what have you. All right, so that's kind of our tips and tricks for the tell me about yourself question. There are also other very common interview questions that we'll discuss shortly. And we wanted to bring this up because a very similar process to what Giuliana brought up with creating a table, creating a living CV, knowing how to format your answer, a very similar process can be used to prepare your answers to these questions, because these questions are essentially getting at the same kind of meat. They want to know who you are. They want to know what you stand for. And so these questions include, why did you choose medicine or this particular program or this field? And then it could also be something like, tell me about a challenging time in your life and how you overcame it. And especially tricky is answering the question, why should we accept you? And this is because it's kind of hard to kind of talk yourself up or brag about yourself in a sense. But this is absolutely the time during an interview where you're allowed to kind of not brag, not boast, but be confident in what you've achieved up to this point that you're applying, and be confident that the skills that you've gained from your past experiences will most definitely make you a valuable applicant or a valuable candidate for this opportunity you're applying for. And again, for the next part, what are your strengths and weaknesses? The table that we showed earlier is going to be very helpful in helping you answer this question, because the table will most definitely highlight your strengths, but whatever isn't on your table could probably clue you into areas that you might need improvement. All right, so we'll move on to this last kind of lecture-y slide. And so what is the most common final interview question? And it's always, do you have any questions for us, the interviewers? And so our suggestion for this is to always, always ask a question, have questions prepared beforehand for all your interviews. If you've run out of questions to ask, it could even be as simple as what drew you into this program or what drew you into medicine or something like that. But essentially, this part of the interview is a chance for you to show genuine interest in the program, show the interviewers how well you've researched the program beforehand. And if in that research you came across maybe a professor that you wanted to work with or a research project that you really want to get yourself involved with, it's absolutely the time during an interview to be able to get these questions answered. Because in as much as an interview is a way for the interviewers to kind of screen you as you're fit to be able to join the program, it's also a time for the applicant to be able to ask the program if they're a good fit for them. So an interview is always kind of like a two-way conversation, and the applicant definitely has the right to ask these questions of an interview. All right. Oh, next.
All right, so before I go on to this slide, which is very self explanatory, I want to pause and answer a question in the chat. Linnea asked, I'm curious what the benefit of making a table would be if I already throw everything in my CV. is this useful in medical school applications? To that, I would say it's useful in the sense that it forces you to reflect a little bit more beyond the actual activities that you do, like the actual activity that you do or the work that you're doing. Um, I like having an area where I can talk about my goals and where I can talk about things that I've accomplished and also things that I've learned about myself in an experience. Those are things that don't typically live on a CV. These individual stories or interactions that I have with people or things that I learn about myself when completing a project. And those ultimately end up being the things that they want to see in your medical school application. Like the entirety of your app is a written monologue or story of who you are. And while to an extent they want to see that you have the technical skills, did you do a research project from start to finish? They also would love to see like why it mattered to you so much. And it's so stressful putting together an application. I think just like universally, everyone feels stressed. And so it can be really helpful to have some of those reflections on hand as you're going through them so that you're not, like forcibly brainstorming so much and thinking so hard during what is inevitably going to be a really stressful time of self reflection. So it's not like the most important thing, but I found it really useful. Um, and it's something that I wish I did when I was applying to medical school. So I'm trying to implement it now before I apply to residencies. Okay. Are there any other questions that have come to mind? Because we have said a lot so far. And I also want to say we do have a worksheet that kind of outlines a lot of the things that we talked about so that you can continue to use this in your own day to day. Okay, cool. Feel free to put questions in the chat. Um, this is just kind of a we got to say it out loud, even though it might be very, self explanatory and we know this in common sense. But how you show up to an interview is so important. As my mom tells me, and as her dad tells her, you got to fix your face. People look at your face and they gather a lot of information from it. So making eye contact, being confident, having a neutral and positive expression and smiling when it's appropriate, nodding your head when someone's talking. These are all signals that you're interested in the conversation. Obviously, don't smile the entire time. That is weird, and people are put off by that. Okay. Two, attire. Uh, Always important to be professional, especially in professional spaces. This also feels like a no-brainer sometimes, but you really never know who you're going to run into. During one of my gap years, I ran into the dean of admissions for the school that I go to now in the elevator. We talked about, I don't know, like burritos, but I don't know if that made a difference, but you really, really never know when you're going to have your 15 seconds to shine. And I'm just so grateful that I was like wearing scrubs and looking professional and I was running like a clinical trial visit. Um, but these things do happen, and you are constantly going to be surrounded by people who might be helpful to you in some way or might have something that they can teach you or you can learn from them in some way. So just be aware of that. In terms of body language, this is something that sometimes needs to be practiced because being in an interview is very nerve wracking. But sitting straight, leaning forward, try to uncross your arms. And a strategy that I like to use often is mirroring. Mirroring means, I mean, it's what it sounds like. It's kind of mirroring the pose that the person across from you is showing. There have been studies that have shown that people feel more relaxed, comfortable, and open um, subconsciously to those who are mirroring them. So, I mean, don't like, try to be natural about it, but it's something you can consider. And then lastly, just relax, release. I know it's so stressful to be in this environment. It's so much easier said than done. But take a deep breath and keep your feet firmly planted on the floor. I often cross my legs, but that leads to the jiggle of your knee. So keep both your feet flat on the ground. Tie your hair back and out of your face if you're someone who fidgets with it. And then also, if you're in person, not so much on Zoom, I like to hold my hands like on a table, like in front of me, like this, very demure. But the reason I do that is because if I start to feel nervous or I start to feel fidgety, something that I can do is kind of like squeeze the calluses on my hand. Um, but it's like not very obvious. So it's inevitable to be nervous. It's inevitable to want to fidget. Uh, the most we can do is to try and minimize how obvious that is to the person we're talking to. Okay. All right. A lot of information. I'm so excited to see that we've had some new faces join us. Um, if you guys wouldn't mind, and if you're able to at this time, would you guys like to just introduce yourself, say your name, who you are, where you're from? Yeah, the cow squeezing trick's great. And the check-in question we did today is, what is your favorite smell? So I'll let the two of you who just joined pop in whenever you like.
Hey guys, I'm Matt. I'm one of the co-chairs for education with Giuliana and Jasmine. I'm currently a fourth year medical student at Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Thomas Jefferson University in Philly on the East Coast. Um, and then my favorite smell right now, I guess I have a a coconut and honey candle that I light right next to me. To de-stress, aromatherapy, if you will. So that's what I'm doing right now. Did I answer all the questions? I think I did.
Hi
Thanks.
everyone. Oh, yeah, hi everyone. I joined late. So my name is Naljan. I am a part of the development committee in CFAM. I am based in LA. I am currently in the process of applying to medical school. Um, so this talk is pretty relevant actually. And my favorite smell, it's funny because I do have a sense of smell, so I smell everything. Um, I'm thinking of the smell of donuts right now. Maybe because I'm like in the mood for donuts, but yeah.
All right. Jasmine, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, actually, I kind of want to just take this moment to stop the screen recording. So I'm going to go ahead and do that.